Hello and welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Heart of the Cast. This is 32 or 33, I think.
I think 32, but I might be wrong.
It's crazy. So, coming up to a year almost. Time really does fly. It's genuinely unbelievable that we've gotten this far with the podcast. And thank you all for your support and continued viewership. And that's really what matters. Is you guys keep clicking on the videos and the links and Spotify and stuff to tune
Just
in.
listen to us yap.
Yeah. And today is a bit of a yapathon, actually, because there isn't a super great amount of topics to talk about, at least very specifically relevant to us in some ways. But we've decided to do a dedication to the OCG ban list because theoretically there are some implications and there are some sort of extrapolations we can make as a player base from the OCG because of the recent semi-limit of Maxx C. So that is a big topic. Second of all, we're going to be talking about, I think we're going to dedicate a good amount of time as well to Mimighoul.
Yes.
This is the first time in quite a while that we've had what appears to be a pretty competitive deck. Like, this is...
Ooh, you think so?
It looks... I think with the new support and stuff, we could be looking at something that might be in the YCS topping potential.
Okay.
Definitely regional topping at least.
Okay.
So it seems like it could be something to think about and consider, particularly in the future with, again, another wave of support. I think, right? Is it 3 waves?
Well, no. Usually it's 2. It's 2. The third wave is when they release in the OCG. They usually print a couple cards, like new cards with it.
Oh yeah, when it goes to the OCG, that's when they make the link one in the circular.
Exactly. Yeah.
But for now, we'll talk about the potential of Mimighoul.
Yeah.
And do a little bit of a deep dive on that.
Yeah. I don't know if I think it's like competitive yet, but I don't want to spoil. I don't want to take anything away yet, but it's definitely worth talking about. It's good cards.
Do not take the winds out of my sail. This deck is looking like it's got some stuff behind it. Okay, there's some teeth here.
Okay.
But let's begin with our Patreon question and shout out for just a singular $1 per month. You can help support the cast and put your 2 cents in the discussion on the private Discord, as well as participating in the question of the week, which we're going to be answering now because there is a few things to go through. Most of these should probably be answered throughout the course of this discussion in general when we talk about the ban list. But let's begin with something a little bit more generic, I suppose, per se. A generic question about Ryziel. Can you guys talk a little bit about that? It looks like it's going to be tier 0.
Yeah, I mean, that is something I would have ideally talked about once we've discussed the changes on the OCG Forbidden Limited list, maybe.
Do you want to put that to that section?
Let's put that to after we've gone through the changes that happened to the current top decks in the format. But obviously, Ryziel, just to give this a little bit of an introduction, is like a one of the top tier contenders for the new OCG format because it is probably the meta deck that was hit the least on this list, while it was already basically competing at top levels. But I don't think it's going to be as crazy. And we'll get into why once we're done with discussing the changes, I think. But we'll answer that question today for sure.
And throughout the course of this, lots of these will be answered. So let's go with a completely random generic one. What is the top 5 archetypes for you guys? I don't know if like we can class this as top 5 favorite or top 5. What's the word? Like power.
Let's do favorite. I feel like that's more interesting.
Sure. In no particular order for me, I'd say Burning Abyss, Infernity.
No particular order.
Burning Abyss, Infernity, Emancipator, some pendulum type of variant, I want to say.
Oh, really?
Yeah, potentially. I want to say like Draco Powell. Definitely a pre-MR4 pendulum deck for sure. And honestly, maybe like Paleo.
Ooh, nice. Okay. Well, we got one thing in common.
Yeah, no, the Grass Demise Paleo deck was super good, which apparently we can place in with Masterpiece coming back. Is that 5?
That was 5.
I think that was 4.
I think that was 5.
5? Okay, we'll throw in Dragon like somewhere around there as well.
Okay. All right. I don't know if I just start listing things that I find cool, I'll probably reach more than 5. But in my top 5, there's definitely Paleo.
Okay, you're only allowed one runic variant, just so you know.
I'm only allowed. It's archetypes. Is runic not an archetype?
Well, no, just in case you say like, you know, runic Bestial, runic this.
Oh,
runic
I can
that,
only use it once. Okay, yeah, no, I was just gonna say runic. I was just gonna say runic as one archetype. Okay. And then probably Necros, Mimighoul, but pre-Neptibus Mimighoul. We do not talk about post-Neptibus Mimighoul. Deck went from really cool to really cringe real fast. And does Dragon Ruler count? Dragon Ruler counts, right? That's an archetype.
Yeah.
Yeah, those are my top 5.
Okay. Those are, I think there's like one combo deck in there.
Okay, look. I'm a Yugi boomer, all right?
Literal just old man top 5 list. That's crazy. I don't know what it is. You know, it's like the most toxic type of gameplay to sit and watch someone play. But holy, is it the best feeling to sit and do it yourself? Like it feels nice. What's the craziest combo deck you've played other than I guess like a Shizu tier?
Probably Danger FTK.
Oh yeah, that's definitely that's as far as it goes.
I mean, I've played a lot of the combo decks. You know, I've entered YCSs with Spiral. I've entered YCSs with Goki. It's just like these days, I don't know what it is, but I just tend to not like the quote unquote coin flippy nature of combo decks these days. Like when for example, I mean, it's a current topic, but like when we're recording this is the week leading up to YCS Lille, and I'm preparing for the format, and I'm like looking at the Yubel deck, and it's really powerful and really hard to win against going second. But I'm currently not really considering it for myself because it has the same issue as every other deck, which if you're going second into other Yubel decks, like you get cooked. And I don't like that. I don't know what it is these days with me not wanting to play the meta combo deck. But
I think it's maybe something to do with the idea of more agency sometimes is afforded to control decks.
Yeah.
Whereas with combo decks, it kind of is just like maybe do your combo and then your opponent has to draw the out and you have to draw the out when going second type of thing. Maybe control offers a little bit more outplay.
Ideally, yeah. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't though. Like sometimes you just can't solve a format. And I'm afraid that I like spend too much time coping on stuff that shouldn't be coped on, which I feel like is what's happening right now. But yeah, like I'm in this existential crisis of what to play for YCS Lille, which has a like 50% chance of just being like, oh, I'll just play the runic deck, which is White Forest. But I don't know.
Well, I think the great thing is like sometimes it fails and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
And, I'll never forgive you for playing Libromancer. Holy, that was
bro.
That was
you gotta go through these to you know, like if I don't bring those decks, then like YCS Bologna never happens the way it did.
That's so that's the crazy thing is there's two opposite sides to that. You know, then one day you scrub out, another day you win a whole YCS. With
you gotta
my
believe.
Favorite deck, Smile.
You gotta believe in your stuff, because otherwise you're just never gonna bring anything. Like you gotta believe in medical. Sometimes you gotta be okay with being wrong. The Libromancer deck, I'll admit it, was not the best deck in that tournament.
Well, the thing is, you never play like the best decks. Well, I suppose how you want to define
that's the weird thing.
Best.
That's what got me thinking, because like not anymore. I used to do that a lot, but it just tends to be like in recent years I've developed this habit of I just feel like I want to get an edge, and I never see the edge in playing what everyone is expecting. Like I get that Yubel is a really powerful deck, but I don't really know if it gives you an edge because it's what everyone is expecting, everyone is building their deck against, and at the end of the day, you're just gonna play like hand trap mini games with the Yubel deck, which obviously you're probably still favored to win if you play the deck well and all that. But I don't know. I'm trying to find like. Maybe it's the paleo meta call in the Zoodiac format that got me addicted on making these meta calls. I don't know.
I think the logic and the idea is that, well, at least for you, you know, you've described it there, but I think at the opposite end of that is what I always recommend to new players, for example, is Deck building is like one of the hardest things in Yu-Gi-Oh! I personally think.
Mhm.
And what you should focus on is actually you should just play the best deck, and not
Yeah.
really think too hard about your card choices and stuff like that. I think like once you get comfortable and good enough at
Yeah.
playing the meta deck, then you can branch out and to start creating your own stuff. But I think like modern Yu-Gi-Oh! Has such a high learning curve that
Yeah.
just starting with a meta template,
Yeah.
I think is personally the best way to make that jump from casual to competitive.
No, I 100% agree. You're gonna like lose so much time and like wasted effort by just trying to find like an optimal list or meta call instead of just like playing something that's proven to be at least competitively viable and just learning how to play. Because I feel like learning how to play and understanding the game is step one before you're able to build a deck. Because building a deck requires you to already know how to play and put that theory into practice. But yeah.
So moving on, I suppose, to the ban list, clam list, flan list. We've got a lot of lists to go through.
Dude, you know what's
OCG
crazy about this list?
What is crazy?
They knew when it was happening.
Oh, that is a great thing.
How cringe is that? Can you imagine? Could not be me.
Well, we technically knew when it was happening as well. We were told it was going to be late August, and it was late August.
Ooh.
It was late August, and then it was leaked in a YouTube description.
That it was going to be late August or like the 31st. Yeah.
I was what's the word, deceived into thinking how OCG releases their ban lists. So it turns out that they did used to do live streams and have like some dude like cosplaying and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And releasing the cards and showing them on this big like cardboard placard.
Okay.
But apparently they haven't done that since COVID. It's
that's weird because I definitely remember those streams happening where they had a stream announcing the list. How did it happen this time? It just got posted somewhere?
Yeah, they just have their list on the website.
Okay.
And usually what happens over the last 3 ban lists I've noticed, you click on the link and then it crashes because every Japanese Yu-Gi-Oh player in the country is pressing the link.
Yeah.
And their error page is like a picture of like this like dog like staring at the camera looking really sad with like error, server won't load. So the Twitter comment section, if you go on the Yu-Gi-Oh! OCG Twitter, is just all these Japanese players spamming this sad dog.
Dude, is the dog their horse?
Yeah, pretty much. So eventually one of the players gets in, they screenshot it, and then they put it in the thread, and then people can start talking about it. Yeah. So yeah.
All right, so let's do that. Let us talk about it.
What should we just begin with the elephant in the room, like Maxx C to 2?
So first things first, it is a very large ban list. It's a lot of changes. I haven't counted them, but I feel like it's at least like 40. 3, 6.
Is it that much?
Well, I'm seeing I'm just counting them. There's 11 unlimits. 3, 6, 9. There's 11 semi-limits, so that's 22. Okay, it's not 40. 3, 6. There's 11 limits. It's 34. 34 changes.
So admittedly, there is a lot of, gotta hit your word count for your assignment type of cards in this list.
There's a bunch of things that I feel like we can just very quickly glance over that we don't have to mention much like later. Like, for example, all the Dragon Rulers coming back, stuff getting unlimited like Plush Fire, Quick Fix, the Zeus, the Kirin, that kind of stuff. There's like a couple of cards coming back from limited to semi-limited, like Ava, Terratop, Pankratops, Invoker, Luster Pendulum. All that kind of stuff, I feel like we can just, move over and just start about the stuff that really matters. So you wanna start with Maxx C? I mean, we've mentioned it a couple times now. We might as well.
You hear that, Billy? He just wants to skip over X-Sabers.
don't tell Billy that. Do not tell Billy that.
Let's begin with the Maxx C. So Maxx C was semi-limited. Do you want to succinctly explain to us why we care? Like, why are these random white boys complaining or caring about what Japan does to their Maxx C in their format? Why is that relevant? What's the deal there? And what's the logic behind it?
Okay, so there's a few things about this. I think the most obvious one, maybe the one you're referring to, is just like Master Duel usually follows the OCG relatively closely. Not exactly. There is differences in our Forbidden and Limited lists. I think the main reason why there are some differences is because the Master Duel Banlist system is sometimes, like they work around the fact that like certain cards are ultras, others are supers, and you get like crafting points back if they hit ultra rares, so they like tend to hit like slightly differently than the OCG, but like the philosophy is often the same. And Maxx C being semi-limited in the OCG and potentially, copium eventually limited or banned, which could or could not happen, is something that I think it would suggest that could happen in Master Duel as well, which is obviously something that we all want because Maxx C is cringe and should be banned. So yeah, that is the one thing I think. But for me personally, the even bigger thing is the fact that like the OCG and the TCG,
the design direction, right?
Yeah, exactly. Because OCG and TCG are basically two completely different games at the moment because of how powerful Maxx C is. Like, we've got the same archetypes, but the way an archetype works and how good an archetype is can be night and day between OCG and TCG because they've got Maxx C. They even got Fuwaross on top of that. So before this ban list, they had functionally 6 copies of Maxx C. So a lot of their decks in the format are completely dictated by how good are they into those those kind of cards. Like Tenpai is good for us. Imagine how good that deck is in a format with 3 Maxx C, 3 Fuwaross. Like it was a monster to deal with. Rarity, which is a deck from Crossover Breakers, took over the meta because apparently, from what I've heard, it is actually quite good into Maxx C and Fuwaross and plays well through hand traps in general, and that's why it was a top meta contender. And yeah, like I feel like maybe just so that's not just me yapping, but like why do we think it's important that both games like have a lot of stuff in common? Like why is it important for the games to be close?
So I think like the theory goes that cards are made and designed in Japan, and OCG kind of dictates the direction of what happens with cards. So because of the design philosophy of, well, Maxx C is in the format, Maxx C, and the argument that is used for Maxx C in OCG is it keeps the meta in check, it keeps these powerful cards from running rampant, which is why they generally have had the historically broken cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! Last longer in their formats, like Electromite, like Block Dragon, etc., etc. These cards tend to have had a longer lifespan in OCG rather than TCG, and the logic has generally been theorized that, well, they make the cards and they make the their ban list revolves and their game revolves around Maxx C, so it's okay to have these really powerful cards. The really bad side effect of that is that TCG then gets to play with those same cards, theoretically designed around Maxx C, in a format that has Maxx C banned. So we end up with, really insane power spikes every couple of years, like Tearlament into Snake Eye, into Azamina, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So why this is such a big deal and why people are starting to see, hey, Maxx C, he bleeds. He doesn't have diplomatic immunity. If they are slowly phasing out Maxx C, then you kind of have to change your design direction because Maxx C is going to dictate a third of every game. 33% of every Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel is going to have some sort of side quest minigame involved of trying to resolve a Maxx C. And your deck, and how good your deck is, has to be good enough to play or beat Maxx C. Which is why we've seen such a difference in the power of some decks. We've had Unchained for a format in TCG, for example, be potentially considered the best deck. OCG has pretty much never had Unchained ever be relevant because that deck just cannot do anything into a Maxx C, basically. So there's a couple of examples of different themes and archetypes that have just sort of never really got off in OCG versus our format, and vice versa. There was like Dragun Turbo, I think, was a massively powerful and important meta-defining deck in OCG in around 2018-ish, I think, or 2020. Whereas in TCG, Dragun was just kind of like a thing you did at the last part of your combo with Verte. It was never like, I'm going to play Dragun and Dragun is my win condition in deck. That was very much an OCG design because, like, well, giving your opponent an upstart goblin to summon an untargetable, indestructible Omni Negate is very good value into Maxx C. So that's sort of the logic and why we are coping on this Maxx C semi-limit and OCG actually having massive ramifications for the entirety of the Yu-Gi-Oh! The Yu-Gi-Oh! Game.
Yeah. And it's especially important to me because I feel like this sort of Maxx C band-aid fix to combo decks is, in my opinion, this is subjective, but in my opinion, it is a rather poor approach to game design and game balancing, because it's just like statistically it works, right? Like if you have a deck like Super Heavy Samurai, just to use one of the more outrageous combo decks from recent, like from last year, just because that deck loses a certain percentage of its game to Maxx C, in my opinion, does not make it a well-designed deck or archetype or fun to play with or against, because it just creates this sort of dynamic of if my opponent has Maxx C, I almost can't win the game, and if they don't have Maxx C, I'm going to do some incredibly broken stuff. And this is like a dynamic that is, no matter what happens, only fun for one player ever. It's never fun for both, and I feel like that is something that should be taken into account more often when designing cards, is not simply like, oh, what is this deck's win rate going to be? Because I like Super Heavy Samurai ended up being a deck, for example, in Master Duel that was good and played, but it never completely took over or had an incredibly outrageous win rate. But that did not change the fact that it simply wasn't that fun to play with or against, because simply a certain portion of your games was dictated by Maxx C. And Maxx C does exactly this in Master Duel at the moment. It does tone down statistically the win rate of going first. And some of these decks that more heavily lean into like certain combos, but it doesn't actually make the game more fun, which ultimately that should be the goal of every single card you make, is it should make the game a better experience. And like if you are trying to lower the win rate of a certain combo deck, then Maxx C, in my opinion, cannot be the answer. The answer is make the combo deck worse to begin with, make it more fun to play against if you don't have an answer to it, or if you don't have a hard counter to it. And this, I mean, I feel like Fuwaross is a card that obviously we in the TCG, we don't like a possible future where Fuwaross takes over, because we don't have Maxx C, right? We don't have this problem right now. So for us, it's not like a replacement kind of thing. Like we didn't ask for this card. We didn't ask for a Maxx C replacement. Whereas I feel like in the OCG, this was the logic applied. And I'm happy to see it being semi-limited now and hopefully limited and banned in the future, because I've said this before in some episode of the cast, but like I cannot wrap my head around the possibility that anyone there thinks we need more copies of Maxx C. Like Fuwaross was designed as a replacement for Maxx C, not as an additional copy. And if that's not true, then I don't know what to even think of OCG like card designers anymore.
Yeah, especially when you consider going second decks, specifically Tenpai, like having access to just that many ways to completely just shut down your turn.
Yeah.
Dropping a Maxx C in and of itself shuts down your turn. And on top of that, you have like Fuwaross as well. Like it's really just, not fun. And I think the point you brought up is really true. And I think in a practical sense, a lot of people get frustrated with it, because there's two ways you can hit a deck. Yeah. You can make it really inconsistent, or you can just reduce its power level. Now, if you make it really inconsistent, it is going to lose some games randomly because it just gets Maxx C'd and doesn't have an out. Yeah. So you can address this by having Maxx C in the format. Therefore, combo decks just randomly just lose some games. Yeah. But ultimately, as you said, it's more fun to actually have an interactive game instead of the game ending before it's really started. Yep. Whenever a Maxx C resolves. Yep. Because it really is hard to come back from a Maxx C. And one of the jarring statistics we saw that come out of the World Championship specifically, shout-outs to Emery, my GOAT, by the way, with a 67% win rate. The win rate of players going second into a resolved Maxx C was abysmally low. It was like 32%. So if you go second, your opponent does a combo, even if you hand trap them a couple times, they set up their field, they Maxx C you doesn't matter how good of a player you are, you statistically, according to the World Championships, small pool sample, etc., but you're just going to lose over 2/3 of your duels. Yeah. And that's like a really big statistic just for a single card resolving in its power level. Yeah.
No, there isn't really much to add on, I feel like, especially because I feel like most of our audience is like TCG, where we have the direct comparison between TCG and Master Duel, and both have their own benefits, and they're fun in their own right. But I feel like everyone who's played both games extensively knows that Maxx C is one of the things that makes Master Duel less fun than it could be. Let's just say it like that. Like Master Duel could be, in my opinion, a lot more fun if it just didn't have Maxx C involved, and in return, obviously, hit some of the combo decks harder, because obviously if you just hit Maxx C without hitting the combo decks, then there's a you need to balance it out, right? Which is what the TCG is doing. That is one of the reasons why I think in recent times, like we've gotten a ban on Baron, Apo, Savage, which all of those cards are still legal in the OCG, and I'm pretty sure that their argument for it is, well, we've got Maxx C to keep those decks in check, which, go figure. Like either you don't play the game, or if you play the game, you get to end on some incredibly unfair stuff. And I feel like it's relatively easy to see that the fix is just get rid of Maxx C and get rid of the other, like the broken endboard pieces, which both of which individually are not great and fun, So like, it's mind-blowing to me that it took all the way until 2024 and a replacement print in Fuwaross to even semi-limit this card in the OCG, but hey, it's something.
Here is a really, really fun trivia fact for everyone.
No.
7 years ago.
No, it's not a fun fact.
Almost to the day. On October 2017, Maxx C in the OCG was semi-limited down from 3. The very next ban list, in January 2018, the 1st of January, they put it back up to 3. So, in a nightmare situation or world,
no,
we could be repeating what happened 7 years ago.
No,
I think that
there's
was the same
no
list
way.
I think that was the same list they hit Ash, weirdly enough. Fun fact, Ash has only ever been hit once, and it was, I think, on this exact same list as well. They put Ash and Maxx C both to 2, and then the next list, they just both went back to 3. It was such a bizarre...
Yeah.
Like, I don't know what the logic... I would love to know what they were thinking and why they decided to go back on it.
Yeah, that is... I don't even want to begin thinking about the logic behind bringing back Maxx C from 2 to 3.
Because what I could gather from really bad English Google translated comments on Twitter and stuff like that is it seems to be a very popular casual card, which I guess naturally makes sense because casuals over here make the same argument, which is that Maxx C is the only thing keeping Timmy's favorite, jank deck in contention is that he can drop Maxx C against Snake Eye. So that's, I think, like a pretty what I could gather, a relatively popular argument that was being thrown around. So maybe there was just like a lot of pushback back then on Maxx C. My argument for that has always been, well, your casual deck gets hit by Maxx C. Like sometimes I play Burning Abyss, a deck from 10 years ago, and I have to give my opponent 3 draws to summon a Beatrice and pass.
Yes,
right?
yes, but I feel like you do get some mileage out of it, because imagine like your deck is like genuinely like so casual that it's almost like it can't win going second, right? Against like unless the opponent bricks. So like your win rate going second is abysmal, right? You have like a 5% win rate because you literally only win if your opponent bricks. By Maxx C getting thrown into the mix, that will increase your win rate, right? Like even if your own deck can get Maxx C'd, I think you would gladly, because see it this way, the games you're losing to Maxx C are also games that you might have lost anyways. The games you're winning because of Maxx C are never games you would have won anyways. They're usually games that you steal from your opponent by using Maxx C, right?
I think it depends on how bad of a deck we're talking about, right?
Kind of,
like I think if you take like a roguish but semi-competent deck like Pearly, like Unchained, right? Like I think like with the right staples you could beat like Snake Eye. But if Maxx C resolves in either one of those directions, that player is going to have a significant boost, right?
Yeah.
So Pearly isn't bad. I didn't say it's bad. It's clearly not Snake Eye Fire.
No, it's like tier 2, 3-ish. It's a fair argument, I think. But I do understand that argument of like if you're like, because most of the rogue decks will not have the same amount of excessive special summon as like a Snake Eye combo does, right? So from their perspective, it's somewhat understandable that they're like, hey, I want the opportunity to just drop a Maxx C on my opponent and stop all that from happening. I don't want to watch this movie again, right? But I mean, this is potentially the reason why they made Fuwaross, right? Because Fuwaross does that for them, but it's competitively speaking a more balanced card. It's still incredibly powerful, Fuwaross, that is. And we're gonna have to see if, you know, how we like it in the TCG. I predict it's not gonna be super well received when it comes out, but it does kind of function as like a more fair version of Maxx C. Still incredibly powerful, but it at least only works going second, which is arguably something that Maxx C should have already had. It is one of the suggestions that people had for Maxx C a long time ago already.
Do you think if Fuwaross was extra deck only, it would have been completely balanced? Or do you think it would be too weak?
It would not have been too weak, in my opinion. I wouldn't say like, too weak. I think it would have been powerful enough to see play. I'm not sure if it would have made it into like a main deck staple, because there's a lot of these types of cards that are only good when you go second, and they only see main deck play occasionally, right? Like cards like Dark Ruler, Evenly, even sometimes Thrust or Talents in certain formats are only good when you go second, and they still see main deck play sometimes. So, but they need to be very good in that format. And so if there's a couple of decks in the format that don't summon from the extra deck that much, then maybe it would only be a side deck card. But I personally think...
Is that bad? That's the thing though, right? Like,
not at all. That's not my argument. Is not that would be bad. Like, that would probably be healthy. I think that would roughly be like, it's hard for me to say because I feel like we've hit the ideal card design with Purulia. I really feel like that card is well designed and is being played in the exact way that I would like it to be played right now, because like most of the meta decks get hit by Purulia a decent amount, but not like crazy. Most decks only side deck it, and in most matchups it draws you like 2 cards, sometimes 3. And I feel like that's where we just should have stopped, right? I feel like that's where, like, that was good, right? That's what I wanted from a card like that. And then we went a step further, which we didn't have to.
Yeah, because like hand is somewhat niche in some sense. I mean, every deck has a normal summon, but also at the same time, it's like not really super common outside of your normal to like spam from your hand. Whereas consistently accessing your extra deck, that's pretty consistent. Like, you're going to get like 2 or 3 draws. But then when you include the main deck as well,
yeah, the main deck one wasn't necessary. It really wasn't.
Yeah, that feels like really oppressive in my opinion. So I don't know. We'll see how it plays out in the TCG. I think it's going to be an absolute mainstay. I think a lot of people are going to be playing this card. Yep. Decks that can main deck it will main deck it. Tenpai will 100% main deck it. Yep. And I legitimately think if people do eventually buy what is probably going to be a secret rare, which kind of sucks. You will 100% play rate. I think
I'll say it right now. If that card is not a secret rare, it's 100% because they want to ban it. Like that. If that card is not a secret rare, don't even spend 50 cents on it because that shit's is banned. I think it's gonna be a secret rare. I think it's gonna stay around for a while. I could see, like, for the same reasoning that they hit Maxx C in the TCG a long time ago. I'm pretty sure that that card is something that they will consider hitting. I think whether they hit it immediately or whether they hit it, like, I don't know, a year or 2 down the line, depends on whether it's going to be like high rarity or not.
But it's really bizarre because, the rarity thing is maybe a good indication of what gets hit, like they did with Lacrima, for example. So,
but not always, right? Sometimes they just have archetypes with a lot of different cards, and some of them are common, some of them are secret. Doesn't mean that common is getting axed.
So the $20 Fuwaross super rare is gonna be real, hopefully. Are pre-orders up yet? They said something during the stream about when the reveals are. Was it this week they said we're getting reveals?
I think we're getting influencer reveals / openings this week, but I am not sure. But I think they said this week. We haven't gotten any yet.
Yeah, so by the time you've listened to this podcast on the YouTube and Spotify, we might already know some of these cards. So
They should
we'll see
definitely,
how bad they
the
do.
archetype introductions should already be up by the time that this podcast comes out.
Okay, cool. And that's usually where they have the rarity reveals as well. But
Yeah.
I guess like Mulch Army isn't really, is it technically? I mean, the plan is they wanted to make like you know, a line of Mulch armies, right? Because they specifically are worded to indicate that there are other Mulch armies.
Yeah.
So what do we think the next one is? I think we're 100% going to get a Grave Banishment Mulch army.
Like
What's
every
left after
time they summon from grave or banished.
Yeah.
See, that one I would be fine with again.
Yeah.
I think. I don't even know if that one's good enough. I mean, it depends on the format and the deck, but like for the most part.
Well, that's the thing. I'm hoping that, like, I was hoping that the idea with the Mulch armies, they're not supposed to be staples. They're not supposed to be main deck cards. Like, you want them for specific decks, specific matchups, right? But whereas Fuwaross feels like, what is this bad against? Do you know what I mean?
Fuwaross is straight up Maxx C for going second, pretty much.
Yeah. Now, admittedly, Fuwaross does fix probably, I think, like, I've very much kind of just come to terms with Maxx C when I play the Master Duel.
Yeah.
But without a doubt, the most frustrating specific interaction is when you've lost the coin flip, your hand trap gets negated, or they have an extender that plays through. Fair enough. You have an unskippable cutscene. You sit there, you wait, you yap, and then they pass turn, and then they Maxx C. And it's like, well, I mean, if you just showed me that like 10 minutes ago, I would have just hit the cog.
No,
you know what I mean? So it's good in the sense that Fuwaross doesn't have that problem.
Yeah.
So there is positives.
I do 100% agree with that, and I think the fact that like this card is I'm gonna call it a budget Maxx C that eliminates one of the most frustrating factors of Maxx C is like it's probably gonna be less bad than we anticipated to be. Like it's gonna be good and very often very annoying when you get hit by it, but I don't know how bad it's really going to be compared to an actual Maxx C. I think it's not even half as bad.
Yep.
Anyways, this turned into a Mulch army discussion cast. There's 34 hits on this list, and we've talked about Uno. All right, sick.
So basically the same kind of parallels for a lot of these. Like Beatrice ban is a very important one.
Yeah.
But there isn't really much to say that we haven't already said in the previous cast about the ban list, right? Like it's the same sort of logic and idea.
Yeah. The only thing worth pointing out is that Beatrice is the only card that they banned. So most notably, they did not ban Lacrima, which makes a lot of sense for two reasons. The first one is they don't have Necroquip and Aerial Eater as quote-unquote replacements. And they also have different time rules. So maybe that is just why that card wasn't looked up like as toxic as it is in the TCG, right? Because they still got extra turns. So Lacrima is probably a much bigger problem for us than it is for them.
Yeah, especially when you consider how important time rules are. I saw a really interesting Twitter thread by Gimlet, who I believe was a Korean competitor.
Yeah.
Or at least I think he won a DC Cup or something.
He's definitely been at Master Duel Worlds at least once. I want to say maybe both times. I'm not sure.
Yeah, so he made this long thread on Twitter, basically talking about the state of Yu-Gi-Oh in the OCG, and trying as hard as I could to get through the English Google translating. The conclusions and discussions he brought up were actually really similar to TCG for some of the frustrations they have over there, which is very ironic. But one thing he did mention, basically, he was kind of having this discussion about why has OCG #fallen off from being good at the game at Worlds.
Okay.
I think is it 2 years? So last year they had 0 top cut spots for TCG, none whatsoever. Not a single OCG player made top cut.
Yeah.
This year I think there was
one. I think.
Was it one?
I think it was
just one.
I think it was one.
Yeah, and
in the TCG. Yeah.
So one of the reasoning
that is saying 2. It might be 2. Maybe it was 2. I only remember the Fire King player, but maybe there was one in top 8.
one of the reasons he brought up specifically was OCG just like they just haven't gotten used to these time rules. Like it's not something they play with regularly over there. I think still until now, like the time rules that they use at Worlds are not what they have over there. They do not play with this end of phase thing.
It's very interesting that we're playing by the OCG rules, everything gameplay related, but the time rules we just take the TCG ones.
Yeah, it's really arbitrary, isn't it? It's like, okay, you're going to use OCG hand triggers, but we're going to use TCG time rules, and then we're also going to use both card pools, and then mishmash the ban list as well.
See, this is another reason for it's only one event a year, but I feel like the World Championship could be so much more relatable for everybody if we had a format that was closer to each other. Like this ends up being like, because it ends up being nor TCG, like it's not TCG format, it's not OCG formats, it's its own kind of thing. So no one can really look at the World Championship and be like, yeah, I'm gonna try that deck in my format or at my tournaments, because they're always under like restrictions that no one in the world follows. It's the only tournament to ever have those restrictions and rule sets and all that kind of stuff. So we could make that more hype and make the whole it would feel more like we would like OCG and TCG doesn't feel like it's the same community almost, because there's just so little overlap.
I think that's the biggest problem, right? And I don't think there is a fix, quote unquote, for Worlds OCG/TCG spectatorship, because you kind of have to uproot the game in some sense.
There's definitely no short-term solution. It'd be like a long-term, maybe like get closer in terms of ban list and rulings, and maybe even release schedule. Like it doesn't have to be on the same day, but like maybe closer to each other. I don't know, but like it's not something you can do from today to tomorrow.
Yeah, and one thing that I think is really important is relatability, right? Like, admittedly, it is somewhat interesting and very skillful in the sense that as a Worlds competitor, you have to deck build and create this whole new strategy and under this new format that no one has played mostly, and then you have to like go from there. But at the same time, from a spectator perspective, like, well, it's very unrelatable, and I think people want to be able to see their cards kind of represented in some capacity, not like these weird kind of nerfed versions of their deck that they can't really adapt from, they can't really copy in some ways as well. And I mean, I feel like I noticed it. Like I was keeping an eye on the numbers. From what I could tell, whenever it was Mastodon, it was like people were tuning in. Like people, it was hype. Like it was just, I mean, Mastodon has other positives. Like it's just, I think, a better spectator game and stuff like that. But I think it's really cool because it's very relatable. You can literally go in game and just copy your deck. You know,
you
like,
can even watch in game, right? That was also another huge fun feature.
So I feel like the physical card game has some of those issues that were definitely present at Worlds. But anyway, we went on a bit of a tangent from the discussion about Lacrima. But yeah, anyway, TLDR, that was kind of like what one of the points he brought up about OCG suffering was the they just don't use those time rules.
Yeah.
Another important card here, I mean, for better or for worse, Masterpiece.
Come on, important card.
This, I mean, that's pretty
important
big, right?
to who?
Do you not think that this could be a viable deck?
Nah, not really, right?
Quick effect, pop immune to monsters and spells?
You still only win because of the floodgates, though.
Well, yeah, but like a floodgate and the floodgates and a pop backed up by towers.
So
it's not a joke. I genuinely think it's a terrifying boss monster, no matter how old it is.
I agree, but I don't think it is the card that makes the deck viable.
I think the existence of Maxx C and Fuwaross is what makes that deck all still viable, right? Like, you're giving that deck no draws.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Okay.
We'll see if it's viable. You guys keep talking about Noir, but like, you understand, like, Noir was printed, like,
I see what you're saying. Like, I just like feel like True Draco Stun could be a thing, yes. But my argument is like if that type of deck in an environment with Fuwaross and Maxx C and all that, if that type of deck was good, it could have already been played before Masterpiece, because I don't think Masterpiece is the card that like wins you the game. It's going to be like Monarch's Erupt or something. Like the problem with that deck is going to be like you just like go second into a board and have fun. Like maybe Masterpiece helps because you can like attack over something, pop something else. But I think this deck has other problems and that Masterpiece does not really fix. Like how many Card of the Mice do they have? Wait, they have 3?
And the 3 diagram.
3 Card of the Mice. No, okay.
I think people are very much underestimating how good Masterpiece is. Like,
Maybe.
immune to monsters is not a power creepable
Yeah,
thing.
maybe I've forgotten the terrors of 2017 too much.
Now, what I will say is Infinite Impermanence is a card now, which we didn't have before. So
I think you will not have many games where Masterpiece is just like this unoutable thing, because there's also just like monsters. Like it's so much easier to summon monsters that are bigger than it these days, right? Like there were genuinely decks back then where it wasn't really an option to summon something that was bigger than Masterpiece that couldn't just get popped by it. But like these days, you put like an IP Masquerena onto the board and turn that into an access code, that can't get popped, so that just runs over it. You make a Chaos Angel 3500 unaffected by monsters, that runs over it. You can play Underworld Goddess. Like there is better ways of dealing with that card now. So I don't think you're winning because of it being unaffected, but it still is a very powerful card.
Well, that's the thing, right? Like, there are, of course, plenty of ways to out it. But, you know, getting to a big access, getting to an underworld backed up with disruption, you know, even just the engine of like Apocalypse, pop spell, pop Apocalypse, hit like your Link 2, like that's a pretty relevant type of interruption. And like another pop on top of that, like it's a lot to get.
Maybe I'm underestimating it. Maybe I'm underestimating it. Yeah. If anything, here's the thing. If anything, I would take more issue with the Floodgates than Masterpiece, I think. Like, I don't see myself losing to Masterpiece. I see myself losing to Monarch's Erupt.
Should maybe throw some runic cards in there. What do you think?
They are not the problem, is what I think.
So yeah, I don't know what the spells for the TCG. Like, do you think like I feel like Masterpiece could have probably come back already in TCG. It's a question of like, you know, is it something people want to come back? I don't know if it's a particularly healthy card.
Yeah.
But it is way more manageable than it was 7 years ago.
Yeah. Power level wise, I think it could. I think there's a lot of cards on the ban list that could come off. Like Dryden, for example, is another card that is also on this one. It is going from 0 to 1 in the OCG. It's another card that's legal in Master Duel and literally could have happened 3 years ago and like would have been fine in the TCG as well. It's just like arbitrary when they decide to actually do it. And for Masterpiece, they've now decided to do it in the OCG. I'm guessing TCG will keep an eye out for how it goes. And like, if it doesn't really take over and is only being played in like low quantities, then they might also just do it into TCG soon. But if it doesn't have any impact in the OCG, then it also probably won't have that much impact for us, to be honest.
Whatever the case is, I think that if there is a world where Masterpiece is a good card, it will probably be OCG. I think that
because of Maxx C environment kind of thing, I can see that.
Yeah, I think like because of that specifically as well, like they have 3 diagram, so unless they bring back,
I mean, I think the Mize is an even bigger issue, or like the thing. Yeah. Like we have, what is it, 1?
Yeah,
pathetic.
Just 1.
Yeah.
Okay. Very strong Demise opinion randomly.
Bro, I love Demise. I wish Demise was not always a floodgate card like it was in Paleo, but I guess it's 2024 and the reality is that card is always going to be next to Continuous Trap. So
it's interesting the direction that they're taking with zoos, because I believe like Dryden might be like the malicious of OCG format, because I'm pretty sure it's flopped back and forth. Maybe like I think this is the 3rd time.
Has it?
I'm pretty sure Dryden was banned, brought back, banned again, and now this is it. Back again.
Bro, can Zoodiac make them shuffle back? under their Fuwaross because you just make one big tower and they have to like, you give them like 5 draws and then they have to shuffle back. It's still terrible.
Is it like what is it? It's like total cards on field, right?
You get yeah, it's like total cards on the field plus you get to keep the difference plus 6 or something. It's like not even a real drawback.
Yeah, but well, I mean, the thing is, it's random, so you might like hit like.
Well, your opening hand is also random though. Like
yeah, so it's
like if you end on 1 card on the board, which is a Trident, and they have 10 cards in hand, they have to go down to 7. It's like, oh no, I open a random hand of 7 cards and draw an 8. That's terrible for my deck.
That's the thing with Fuwaross, by the way. I always felt like that last effect is basically just ignored, right?
Dude,
because
the drawback is the biggest joke on that card. That it's actually hilarious because it doesn't matter. Like it just like it's not a drawback.
So I think it wasn't supposed to be a drawback per se. I think it was just okay, well, if you do push into it, you're not gonna, let your opponent end on like 15, like compared to Maxx C, right? I guess is.
No, if you make a board of 3 to 4 cards, your opponent will have to end on, unfortunately, only 9 or 10 cards. Yeah.
Yeah. Dragun potentially worth talking about.
I mean, based on the fact that it is they don't have Verte, and we also have Dragun, and no one cares. I can't imagine it really mattering.
I'm not too sure what the change that this will really bring is.
Like maybe you play a deck with like Red-Eyes Fusion to have like a backup plan against like Fuwaross and Maxx C. You can play that again, I guess, like Subterror or something. I don't know. It's not good, right?
Did you hear how I had the Dragun spoiled for me specifically for the ban list?
No, what happened?
Okay, so lucky for them, we know what time the ban list drops. So I went live like at 2, like I normally do. So I didn't check the ban list specifically because I wanted to react.
Yeah.
And then I brought up the Twitter page before my stream started, and then like for some reason, 50 minutes after their ban list post on the OCG Twitter, they posted a Red-Eyes Fusion ruling. So I was like, well, what possible reason would they have to post a Red-Eyes Fusion ruling an hour after their ban list dropped? So yeah.
Well, you're gonna summon Red-Eyes /Dragon with it, of course.
What's the ruling stuff that people have with Red-Eyes? I think it's like if you get solemned on like a normal summon, not normal summon because you can't normal summon on the Red-Eyes. If you try to special and then they solemn it, like can you still Red-Eyes Fusion or something?
Yeah, I don't know the wording exactly, but
that's usually like I think what the ruling issues that people had with Red-Eyes.
You didn't read the ruling.
It was Japanese. What do you mean? I think like the only relevant place for Dragun to come back is Mastodon, right? Because there's Verte and you would have Dragun, right? Like that would be the only real good place. Well, TCG, no, it's Bandit here as well. Yeah, so we have Dragun, no Verte. They have Dragun, no Verte. Now Mastodon has Verte, no Dragun.
Yeah, I think as long as they don't exist together, we're fine.
Yeah, I think the issue with Verte was always like, okay, cool, you've hand trapped me twice. Let's slap them together and make Dragun. But now you have Closed Heaven for that, so really, what's the problem card? All right. Anything else to talk about here? You can maybe take it away with Yubel.
I mean, yeah, let's talk about some meta hits, right? Like we've talked about Maxx C, we've talked about like some of the cards that came back, but this list is quite the slaughter. So let's go through some of these limits, like the newly limited cards. There is a bunch. There's Diabell Star going to 1. There's Poplar going to 1. Chundra going to 1. Phantom of Yubel going to 1. Engraver going to 1. Tract going to 1. And Bonfire.
It's actually crazy. Like they hit every single deck in their format except, Ryziel.
Well, they've hit all the decks that have been meta for a while, I think. Like, yeah. I think the argument is probably that Ryziel and Malice are relatively new. Very, very new, actually. Like a couple of weeks only. And probably just wasn't their time yet. But they have finally axed the previous meta decks. Like, Snake Eye has literally gotten the tier limit treatment, where that deck has, like, everything limited now. Like, every single starter for that deck, except for the Azamina one from Rage of the Abyss, is now at 1. It's 1 Diabellstar, 1 Wanted, 1 Snake Eye Ash, 1 Poplar, 1 Bonfire, and even Engraver for good measure if you want to count it, even though it isn't even a starter anymore without Beatrice. But yeah, that deck has basically gotten the Tearlament treatment, and I feel like it's a good time to talk about that, because do you remember this picture of a full power Tearlament deck with the modern restrictions applied to it?
Yeah,
like how you see all the cards, like what used to be legal, and now every single card has like some ban list sign on it, like either it's banned 1 or 2.
Yeah, it's the screenshot from that game with the red crosses, right?
Yeah.
Is that the one you've seen? Yeah, it's like 70% of the deck is just gone.
By the way, that got even funnier because Maxx C also has a circle now.
Yeah.
It's also, yeah. But what I was going to say is that the Snake Eye deck almost looks the same now. Like you take a full power Snake Eye deck from a year ago and apply modern restrictions to it, almost every single card in that deck has a red circle on it, except for the cards that you only play 1 of anyways. And I feel like, as funny as that is, I find those pictures hilarious. I think it's very funny, but I feel like that should maybe be a warning sign to card designers. Like, maybe be a little bit more careful with your lore decks. If this is what you have to end up doing to a meta deck, then maybe should have been more careful in designing it.
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem, right? I think like if you create an archetype and then 1 year later, you've essentially just like, incinerated 80% of the list.
Yeah.
Like come on. Like what's going on here? Like maybe we shouldn't be making cards like this. I don't know.
It's specifically these lore decks, right? Like, you'll notice, I don't think it's a coincidence that it happened to specifically Tearlament and then Snake Eye, because both were part of that year's like main lore kind of thing, right? Like Tearlament being the best Visas deck, and then Snake Eye being the best Diabellstar deck for a year, and just being like overtuned. And I feel like people were gonna be interested in those kind of decks even if they were slightly less powerful, just because there's like cool lore behind it and stuff like that. It could have even been cooler because then they could have had fun of it like for longer, because you didn't have to like slaughter it. Like, look at Branded, for example. I feel like Branded in comparison is a really successful archetype and better designed one because it's more balanced, right? Like, it's still giga popular. It's still been meta relevant in different formats. It varies from format to format. It's never been the only best tier 0 deck or anything like that. But it's been a lore archetype that's been popular for years now. Keeps getting a little bit more here and there, and it's like, I feel like overall a success because you didn't have to murder it a year in, because you were more careful when designing it. And I really hope that whatever, like, are we expecting a new lore kind of thing soon, right? Are we expecting Diabellstar, Snake Eye stuff to end? Like, is there a specific life cycle for these? Like, I don't know.
Well, the next set is Supreme Darkness, which I think is going back to some legacy stuff. I don't know what like new decks there are, and then Alliance Insight is the theory is that it's just support for the Duelist Alliance decks, potentially.
I don't know. Whenever we start the next lore cycle, I just hope that we look at the past 2 ones, the Snake Eye and the Tearlament ones, and just be like, yeah, we can probably be a little more careful with how powerful we make this lore deck, because there's ways to make these successful without making them as overpowered. But yeah. Regardless, the time has come. Snake Eye has now been completely murdered in the OCG. It's worth pointing out that the deck can theoretically still function, and I think that is one of the main arguments that they use for making these consistency hits, right? Like a Snake Eye deck, technically, I don't even think a single card from the deck is banned yet, which is kind of crazy. It's just all at one. They decided to not go the route of banning Flamberge or original Sinful Spoils or anything like that. You can technically still do a full Snake Eye combo if you open that Snake Eye Ash, which you only have 1 copy of, or search it with your 1 Bonfire. But it's obviously, like, from a competitive standpoint, probably not going to be consistent enough.
But you can still have, like, Wanted and Witch, right?
At 1 each, yeah.
Yeah, so it's weird, right? You can still, like... 4 cards is still technically consistent.
Is it?
It just means... Well, it's not a deck, it's not its own deck, right?
Yeah.
I think is for sure. I don't know what you play it with now.
At that point, though... Like you have like more engine requirements than engine. Like you play a Flamberge, a Snake Idea, Bellstar, an OSS, a Temple, an Oak for 4 starters.
Yeah, and like there's basically no extension if any one of them gets hit now.
Yeah. So that's another thing. Like from the I think from a statistical and competitive standpoint, the deck has been dealt with. Like I don't think this deck is going to really dominate any OCG format anymore. And in a way, you have kept it alive for any like hardcore fans. You know, they can theoretically still do it. You can go to locals and try to Snake Eye combo someone. Like your chances are not high, but you can technically still do it. Which I guess has its pros and cons. You know, we always criticize consistency hits, but like if there is anyone who is a real, like a huge Snake Eye fan, then I guess they can still play the deck, which is a positive. So I don't know exactly how I feel about it, but
apparently Jerome is like he was dropping like some absolute lore bombs about Goblin Bikers, and the Azamina connection. Like I don't know if it's all known already, but he was.
Bro, I don't see no Goblin Biker Azamina connection. I see Azamina cards in Snake Eye decks all the time, though.
Well, I mean, that's not what the story says.
Yeah, but that's what the real life story says, though.
Oh, okay. Well, listen. I don't have a comeback.
I'm gonna tell my at YCS Bologna, if I play against anyone who's playing Azamina Snake Eye, while they combo, I will tell them all about this. I will tell them how their Azamina cards technically belong in a Goblin Biker deck.
Yeah, I'm gonna take Goblin Biker to a YCS, and anytime I play against Snake Eye, I'm like, oh, die Bellstar, jail. Sorry, that's lore. Jail.
Arrested.
Yep. Mentioning next, Yubel.
Yeah. Phantom of Yubel could have been once per turn. Now is once per turn by default. So that's been fixed. That's good. But more importantly, I guess if you want to go deck by deck, there is also Nightmare Throne at 2, just to mention. So they lose a bunch of starters by Nightmare Throne going to 2. And Engraver and Tract, obviously limiting your access to the Fiendsmith engine. It is worth pointing out that Engraver is still fine to draw. I was thinking earlier, like, Engraver is a terrible draw now because you can't go Engraver into Tract, into Lurie, into Requiem, summon another Engraver. But obviously in Rage of the Abyss, we get the new Fiendsmith main deck monster, so you can still summon that with Requiem. But still, Engraver does not make rank 6s as easily anymore. And I think it does... what it was supposed to do is like it still makes it so you can go into Moon to access some Fiendsmith cards, but they're just nowhere near as powerful. Yeah.
I think one of the interesting hits as well was it's kind of bad, but like in theory, what you could do is you could play like Throne and then just have an Omni negate in any deck, right? Like
a monster negate, yeah.
So because they semi-limited it, it's like I think Phantom limit by itself is enough to severely hurt you. But I wouldn't play it. But you could theoretically like just play 3 Throne and just have 1 Omni and throw it in other things. But they also even hit that. So they don't even want you to do that. So
you could still. It's just like you're getting a much worse deal now in deck building, right? Like for example, in the TCG right now, you get 4 copies of Throne if you play Terraforming. And you have to play 1 Spirit, 1 Yubel as quote-unquote bricks, which is a 4-to-2 ratio. In the OCG, I don't know if they have Terraforming. I know Master Duel has Terraforming banned. I think the OCG has it. So for them, it's just like slightly worse, like a 3-to-2 ratio, which is probably not worth it for most decks, but it's theoretically still possible. It's just worse.
2 Gamma, 2 Driver, you know?
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
Okay. Anything else we want to wrap up here? Because we have a lot of Mimighoul cards we should probably touch on.
Yeah. Okay. So just quickly, Chandra to 1 is also a phenomenal hit in my opinion because I feel like these OCG hits for Tenpai have been on point because it makes the deck like the deck's biggest like frustration thing was probably that it's hard to interact with. And the 2 cards that are the hardest to interact with are the Field Spell and Hard Drawn Chandra. Because if they Hard Draw Chandra, like you can like imperm their normal summon, they will just special summon it. And at that point, like what do you really do about it? Because it activates in the damage step. So even if you have another imperm or effect veiler or anything like that, like you can imperm it, but then they will synchro into the level 7 and bring it back, and it can still attack and use its effect. So like, it makes, I honestly, I've heard OCG players talk about this, and they still think Tenpai is playable, because at the end of the day, it is a blind second deck in a Fuwaross game format. So like, it's just easier to interact with, right? Like you can now realistically interact with the Tenpai player without them just activating field spell, special summon Chandra, like have fun. So that's good, right? And I feel like
this dude was joking, but I saw an OCG player post on Twitter saying that they're going to play 3 Mass Dragon, and I was like, huh, that's terrible. Wait a second.
Yeah, dude, you say that until you think about it for a moment, and you're like, dude, that's actually, you know what? That's kind of scary, dude. If you run into my monster with a Mass Dragon, please don't do that.
Like, I mean, remember Mystic at the World Championship in like what, 2016?
Yeah.
So
no, Tenpai, because Tenpai is still scary. Because what doesn't change about the deck is that it has a ton of non-engine, doesn't care about your opponent's Mulch armies, and if it resolves one of its cards, you still die. It's just easier to stop them from doing that. But like at the end of the day, it's still like a functioning concept, I feel like. But yeah, maybe to wrap it up, very solid hits for Tenpai, Yubel, and Snake Eye, which is absolutely the 3 decks you want to hit, and is obviously overall very well received. Maxx C going in the right direction, so that's all very, very good. A lot of cards coming off of the list that can come off the list. So everything moving in the right direction here, I feel like. A lot of good changes, important changes. And the only negative I've heard, I guess, just to quickly cover it, is that they didn't hit Ryziel and Malice at all. Which Ryziel was already a top performing deck in the game. However, I feel like, first of all, both of these decks are very new, which I didn't really expect them to hit them really hard. Like Bonfire to 1 does hit Ryziel a little bit because they do play Pyro monsters. But honestly, I just like, in my head, this is my first impression. I haven't played these decks yet, but like, I would much rather go to a tournament where I'm expecting Ryziel and Malice everywhere rather than Snake Eye, Yubel, and Tenpai. Like, I just feel like that is...
I saw you talking about that earlier, and I think, like, ultimately, like, listen, in a competitive metagame, there's always going to be a best deck.
Exactly.
But as long as the best deck is, like, interesting to play against to an extent, I think that's the most important thing. And in the TCG, I'm really, personally, really super looking forward to... Ryziel Malice format. I might be completely wrong. It could be terrible, but I feel like it's a breath of fresh air we really need.
I mean, there's always a chance that you're wrong about your first impression. Like my first impression is the same. Like I think Ryziel and Malice, while they are good decks and have their own benefits, like they're powerful combo decks. Otherwise, they wouldn't be playable. But like, they seem way less oppressive than Snake Eye. They seem way more beatable than a Yubel end board, and so on and so forth. I've heard OCG players talk about this, saying they don't think Ryziel is going to be tier 0 because it was mainly good because it was so good against all the hand traps that people were forced to play because of Snake Eye and Yubel. So like if Ryziel is now the deck to beat, people might just build their decks differently, right? Like the entire dynamic of the format might change because those decks will leave the format, which might end up not being great for Ryziel, right? Like if people are on board breakers, apparently the Ryziel deck is very easy to interact with if you're not trying to hand trap them. Rather, you just let them cook and then activate a board breaker, right? So like we'll see how it turns out in the OCG, but I feel like the OCG is very hopeful right now. I think they like this ban list a lot, and I can definitely see why. So I think this OCG ban list is overall probably a huge W for them, and I can only hope that our next one goes in the same direction, right? Because that is when we demand the Snake Eye and Yubel format to end, basically, and just we want to have a similar segue into the next format, quote unquote, right?
Yep, overall good stuff from the OCG. I think this is maybe one of the best ban lists I've seen across both formats in quite a while now. So this is looking like some good stuff. And the main takeaway, Maxx C going in the right direction, could be a solid indication for the future of card design and for Masado as well. So we'll see how it goes. Do you want to maybe quickly touch upon like the Masado idea behind it, right? Like, do you think because Master Duel is specifically best of one, Maxx C is quote unquote healthier in a best of one environment?
No. I
Because
don't
if
think
I
so.
was to like use the devil's advocate argument here, best of one is better for Maxx C because you don't stand a chance if you lose a coins flip going second. So at least Maxx C gives you some kind of like, you know. But arguably, you could maybe even look at it as like it's actually worse because in best of three you can nullify the variance of Maxx C. So it's really weird, right? Because you could maybe potentially look at it both ways.
I think you summed it up quite well. I think that's why overall it's not that different. Like it's got some things going for it in a best of one. It's got some things that are even worse in a best of one. Like overall it's just about like is the dynamic of the card fun or not? And I think the answer is the same whether it's best of one or best of three. Like if you play
But
a
again,
best of
it's not
three in the OCG.
if we're using the logic that we have interpreted to be the theory is that, you know, they look at things like win rates and stuff, right?
Yeah.
So if we're looking at the win rate of a deck and, you know, Maxx C in a format brings down a win rate, best of one could severely inflate win rate, don't you think? If without Maxx C for some decks, you know, when you're going first and when you're going
Yes,
second.
you definitely have to be more careful when designing combo decks in a game without Maxx C, which I think that's the point. I feel like that is the point. Yeah, you need to be very careful. And yes, if they want to ban Maxx C, they need to get rid of a lot of other stuff that the TCG has gotten rid of a long time ago because we realized if there's no Maxx C, those cards need to be gone, right? So it's a process. Like you can't just ban Maxx C and not do anything else, and the game is going to be a better place because it wouldn't be, right? Like people would have like no reason not to play the craziest combo stuff available in Master Duel, which is like there's a lot of stuff in the game that is banned. Like I've made boards in Master Duel that are entirely banned in the TCG, like Appaloosa, Baron, Sprite, Elf, Borrowload Savage. Like I played Dragon Link last week or something. I made an end board that had no legal card in the TCG. Like Fairy Tale Snow, all those kind of things. Like there's so much in Master Duel that you'd have to get rid of if you want to ban Maxx C. But at the end of the day, I feel like that's going to be worth it. You know, that's going to be worth it. But yeah, long story short, I do think Maxx C in best of one is a very high variance card still, and just doesn't belong in modern Yu-Gi-Oh. I feel like.
I'm like imagining this scene in my head of like an end board of like Appaloosa, Savage, Baron, and then you versus the guy she tells you not to worry about, and it's like Master Duel versus TCG end board. And Snow and Grave, all right, Ghoulies. So I came straight out of the woodwork here immediately. My hot take is I think this is actually looking like a solid deck. I think this might be the best TCG deck we've had in a hot minute. I think these new cards do so much for the deck. It has a win condition now. It has consistency. It's got extenders. I genuinely, like, hats off to whoever made these cards. Like, it is a real breath of fresh air. Like, this is how you make support. Like, this is what we're looking for.
I agree, and I'm really happy with the Mimighoul archetype in general. Not only from a competitive perspective, because whether the deck can actually compete at a high level remains to be seen. There's some other factors that are hurting it a little bit. We'll talk about Dominus Impulse in a second. But like design wise, I just love this deck and this archetype, and especially like these 14 cards in particular. They're not all crazy. There is cards in here that are probably not going to end up seeing play. Like you could have used the 14 slots better. Like maybe rough estimate, like 10 to 12 of these are very nice, and then like 2 to 4 are like all right, you know.
So I think the biggest takeaway is that even like the worst Mimighoul, which is what, like probably like fairy, sorry, not fairy, armor.
Yeah.
It's like worst case scenario, it's like just a guy you can summon, right? And it gets you to the rank 1. And the rank 1s are really good. Like,
yeah.
really
So
solid
I guess
rank
maybe
ones.
just for everyone who may or may not have followed these reveals, there are 3 new main deck monsters, 2 new Xyz monsters, and 2 new spell cards. All 3 main deck monsters follow the same structure as all of the Mimighoul flip monsters. There are 3 new flips that you can either summon. You can just summon them to your opponent's field, and they have a flip effect that they do, and then they come back to your side of the field, and they have slightly different secondary effects. So you've got Armor, which its flip effect is probably the most mediocre one in the entire deck, which is just like this turn Mimighouls can't be destroyed by battle. And its secondary effect is if you don't want to give it to your opponent face down, you can summon it to your own side of the field face up if your opponent has a monster. So it can just be a level 1 Mimighoul extender, which matters because they have rank 1s now. Mimighoul Fairy's flip effect is this turn you cannot activate the effects of monsters special summoned from your hand, which obviously applies to the opponent then. Which is a floodgate effect that's very powerful against some decks and is not going to do much against others, but it's a potentially really dangerous card. I mean, that is a card that can probably win you the Snake Eye matchup on its own, because no more Poplar to search, no more Black Witch, and like, you know, like what's left is relatively easy to be dealt with. So that's a powerful effect potentially. And her secondary effect, if you just want to summon her to your side of the field, is if you control a Mimighoul, you can just summon it face up. So also an extender. And then the best one in the bunch is probably Slime, which is on flip, it lets the opponent, so the Mimighoul player, summon any Mimighoul from their deck. And then it switches control. So that's pretty nice. And if the opponent controls more monster than you do, you can special summon it to your side of the field face up instead of giving it to your opponent as well. All of these you might think only work when you go second, the secondary effects, but because you're playing Mimighoul, you can also just give your opponent a Mimighoul and then summon this from your hand to your own side of the field.
I'm gonna really commend the main deck monsters here because again, like I think the most important effect is the secondary effect as well. So even if you're not trying to, or you do get stopped on your primary effects, like the fact that you can just summon and then go into these rank 1s is really good, because these rank 1s are just everything you would want from an extra deck monster. They are really powerful, but they're not busted, they're not broken, they don't really feel super unfair. And I really like that about them. So maybe we'll just reiterate. So Throne is a new one. It requires 2 level 1s. Detachment here, you can summon a master from hand, deck, or grave, which is really cool because it means that it's not a hard garnet. And then during the main phase quick effect, you can target a Mimighoul, equip it, equip this monster to that Mimighoul. It gives it attack, and then you can bounce cards. So essentially, it gets a guy out your deck, and it's Hieratic Seals. You can only use 1 effect per turn, which I was really disappointed in because it makes it going second a lot worse with this. I really would have wished that it was 1 effect per turn instead of 1 of those effects per turn.
Well, here's the cool thing about that, though, is this is my favorite part about that they made 2 Xyz, is that Mimighoul Throne is the better one going first because it gives you, like, it teleports out the master, which is a good card in of itself. But then you're supposed to just leave it on the board because it has a quick effect bounce on the opponent's turn. But when you're going second, like Giant Mimighoul has a good effect for going second, right?
Yeah, so, and the interesting thing about Giant Mimighoul is that it's a generic.
Yeah.
Which means level 1 extenders could be played. You know, we might see people playing Jester Confit. I'm advocating for Kinkabio. Can't wait to see that card be played.
Does Kinkabio summon from hand, or does it have to be graveyard?
I think it's grave. I'm pretty sure it's just grave.
I don't know if that's
generic.
I don't know if that's good enough.
Yeah, probably not. It was.
You can Snake Eye Ash is
I didn't
Mimighoul
actually
combo.
buy 47,000 copies.
Snake Eye Ash can make Giant Mimighoul.
That's the hilarious thing. Yeah, if you really want to, you can play a small Snake Eye engine. So generic rank 1, rock earth monster, best type attribute combination. Your non-Xyz Mimighouls can attack directly while your opponent controls a face down. So now this deck has serious OTK potential because as I read this, there's also going to be a burn effect attached to this. So you can just attack directly, somewhat similar to Ghost Tricks. So much of this deck reminds me of Ghost Tricks, and it's like if Ghost Tricks were good, basically. And you can only use the following effects once per turn. If it's Xyz summoned, add a Mimighoul card from deck to hand. Any Mimighoul card, trap, spell, field spell, master, whatever. You know, it's just generic. You can also detach and then target face-up cards up to the number of face downs your opponent controls, and then pop them for 1,000 each. So you can hit back row, well, face-up spells and traps. You can hit monsters. Super, super cool card. Really sick.
So do you say OTK potential, but like I mean I guess it's true, but the problem is that Mimighoul Dungeon only boosts Mimighouls that were not special summoned or normal summoned during that turn.
Wait, really?
Yeah, like the Mimighouls have to like be around for a turn for them to grow huge.
That sucks. But you can still make them massive though, right?
They become pretty big, and that's the thing. Like you can just like if you can manage to survive one turn and just keep a bunch of these guys around, you can ignore your opponent's board, give them a set monster, and just attack them like to the face. Like it's pretty nice.
Yeah. Plus, of course, the burn effect is well, it's not nice per se, but let's just say in modern Yu-Gi-Oh, having a burn effect is very important for tournament competitive viability.
Yes, so it definitely helps.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I just want to reiterate, I really love that they gave this deck rank 1s specifically, because that solves... I'm a huge fan of making a wave of cards and then making a second wave that solves problems that the deck actually has. Which, for example, like you can use these Mimighouls before this set. You can like give them to your opponent, flip them up, they run back to you. What do you do with them, right? That was a problem. So like they needed an Exceed or a Link, I feel like, and they went for an Exceed here, which is nice. They did not go for some random like fusion stuff that like wasn't gonna see play, like, you know. They gave them two really good Exceed monsters that give you an actual payoff for giving these Mimighouls to your opponent, then going through the effort of flipping them up and getting them back. You get an option for going first, and you get an option for going second, and potentially, like, if you ever have a really explosive turn, you could even make both. That's pretty cool. So I think both of these Exceeds are exactly what Mimighoul wanted, and yeah, they're just pretty damn good and pretty cool. And in terms of the main deck monsters, it's also really nice. We've got some new good flip effects, and we've also got extension capabilities that goes alongside the Exceeds, right? Like all of these have an effect that lets them just summon themselves to your own side of the field as level 1 extenders, and we have a really good reason to do that because we have those rank 1 Exceeds, so that's really cool. But they also got 2 new spell cards, which are probably the more questionable one in the bunch. Like, they're both fine. I'm not sure if they end up making it into a competitive Mimighoul deck though. So you've got Mimighoul Fork, which is conceptually a really good card, or cool card, which reads, target a face down monster your opponent controls. Your opponent chooses one of the following effects and you apply that effect. So they get to pick between change that monster that you targeted to face up attack or defense position, or you send it to the graveyard and then the owner draws 2 cards. Obviously with the idea being you give them a Mimighoul, you target that Mimighoul, and your opponent can then either flip it up or send it to the graveyard and you draw 2 cards. And then you can banish it from the graveyard to add another Mimighoul Fork from the deck to the hand, but it is once per turn on each of the effects. So this card is kind of cool, but I think the problem is that your opponent gets to choose. So you're like, most of the time, I think you're just going to get to draw 2, which makes this like a weird version of trade-in for the deck that's once per turn, which could still be good enough, honestly.
That's what I was thinking, right? It's like, it's not too bad, because, like, worst case scenario, you are just kind of replacing your card advantage.
Yeah, but here's logically, here's the problem with the card. All of these Mimighouls to summon themselves to your opponent's side of the field are once per turn, right? Like, you can't give them the same Mimighoul multiple times. And if you give them a really good Mimighoul, like a Mimighoul with a really good flip effect, right? Your opponent is just going to send it to the graveyard. Yes, you get your cards back, but you can't give them that Mimighoul again. And if you give them a bad Mimighoul to just cycle it, quote unquote, they can just choose to flip it.
I think with the consistency of having, room and all of, like, most of them having good, like, flip effects, I don't think it's going to be too bad of an idea.
Look, maybe it's still fine. Maybe you still play it. Like, I can see this being specifically a 2-of, so that you can activate it once, banish it to grab the second one for free, and just be happy with it.
Yeah, so I think that's like maybe somewhat of a downside in some ways, because the way it's designed is it wants you to play 2 at least, right? I don't think you would just kind of play 1. And it's like, well, is this good enough to play it at a high level environment? Would hand traps just be better? Would board breakers just be better, right? Like, so that's kind of like the thing you got to ask yourself, right? Like, is it worth playing over a defensive card?
Yeah, but I think it's worth considering at least, and that's fine. Not every single card has to be like an auto-include broken card for the deck. It's okay to give them a card that has uses, but isn't like, this does not miss like the theme of the deck. Like this card is playable in a Mimighoul deck. Like, it makes sense. It's just maybe it's not powerful enough, but that's still fine. Like, it's an option to consider. Now, Mimighoul Charm, on the other hand, is going to be a secret rare, a continuous spell that has kind of a wacky effect that I'm slightly confused by. Like, I get, but it's once per chain during the main phase. If a Mimighoul monster your opponent controls is flipped face up, you can randomly choose a face down card in your opponent's extra deck, and if it is a monster that can't be special summon it to your field, but it cannot activate its effects this turn. If it wasn't or couldn't be special summoned, banish that card. You can only use that effect twice per turn. So I'm a little confused by this card, because, like, okay, so this, conceptually, it steals cards from your opponent's extra deck, which I guess just goes into the theme of, like, being annoying. Like, I feel like Mimighoul is just a deck that lays a lot of traps and is very annoying to your opponent in a lot of different aspects. You know, like, oh, you don't get to
an RPG like Mimic. Yeah, it's like kind of the theme where it comes from.
Which is cool. I can get behind that. I would have really liked if they gave the Mimighoul deck, when they want to print this kind of card, I really would have liked if they gave them a payoff for stealing your opponent's cards. Like, what I'm thinking is maybe give them a really powerful Link 2, because they have another card that steals monsters from your opponent. Like, why not give Mimighoul a Link 2 that says 1 Mimighoul monster plus 1 monster that your opponent owns? And then give that a really cool effect, so that, like, I can, like, steal one. Like, because remember the flip? There's one flip guy in the first set that banishes, like, cards from the opponent's deck and then steals one of those. I think is it Dragon that does that? I forgot which one it was. Cerberus, that one. Like, what if the deck had a payoff for stealing your opponent's cards? How cool would that be?
The payoff is that you get to build Fiendsmith for free.
Okay.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, but yeah, it does, like, for something, and even the reality is, like, I like to look at these type of cards in the same way that I would look at something like, I don't know, Des Croaking or something, right? It's like, that's a really old boomer example, but
no, I get it,
like, you have this huge payoff, but it requires such a setup that it doesn't help you push through disruption. It doesn't help you really as a starter. I think that it has all of the hallmarks of a bad card, or rather an unplayable card in a competitive environment that I don't think you would ever even play this. It is nice to however, because you could side deck 1. It's very searchable with all of the new support. So if you have the searching options and your opponent hasn't opened enough disruption or whatever, it is like a good option to search going first. Set this up, and it's once per chain, so you can steal 2 guys out their extra deck, and you know, most extra deck monsters don't have summoning restrictions, so you could just, like, hit random monsters that are semi-relevant. Not even because they're good for you, but just, you know, hitting, like, random key pieces is kind of nice. But again, I think the issue is, like, it's random, so it's like, what really is the payoff here? It's like it'll create a funny, cool moment. Absolutely.
Bro, if this card was not random, it'd be crazy, by the way, because it doesn't even... Here's another thing. It does not actually negate the effects of the card you summon. It just says you cannot activate its effects this turn. If you steal SP Lil Knight, your opponent has to play without SP Lil Knight, and you get to use that SP to banish something on their next turn.
Yeah.
Or, like, you steal like an IP Masquerena, you can make your own SP on their turn. Like, it's potentially, it can create some really crazy things against some of the meta decks. You can steal like one part of the Fiendsmith engine and just have it sit on your board, and they just can't do stuff.
But the crazy thing about Charm is like, look, it's the definition of win more. But if this gets rolling once per chain, twice per turn on either player's turn, like you're ramping up this card, right? You're getting like 4 monsters potentially over the course of 2 turns. You know that's a scary amount of payoff potentially.
It's definitely a funny card. I feel like it fits the theme of the Mimighouls. I would have like my I don't know, content brain, card designer brain would have loved if there was an actual payoff for taking your opponent's cards, because I find it odd that there's 2 cards in Mimighouls that steal your opponent's monsters, but don't do anything with them, right? Like a Link 2 that required a monster that your opponent owned and then does something crazy would have been that would have been a payoff to maybe make me consider wanting to play this card even in a competitive sense. Because then it doesn't matter what I hit. Like the random factor is eliminated. Like whatever I hit, it's going to be good for me, because I can turn it into something that like becomes really powerful if I use an opponent's card for it. But maybe that's something that they can do at some point in the future. Well, we'll see.
And of course, we haven't forgotten you, but the one of the absolute best takeaways for this is this deck looks like it's going to be dirt cheap. Every single main deck is a common or a super. Even the secret rare, Charm, or is it Ultra? I don't know. It's
a secret. Charm is secret, and Giant is secret.
Okay, so Giant, you can definitely play one if you're on a budget. Would recommend more, but I mean,
this deck is going to be budget. This deck's going to be budget because I guess talking about its competitive viability, like you think it's good competitively. I have my doubts that it's gonna reach.
Okay, so let's like frame the word good here. Okay. I think this has potential to top a YCS if it's piloted really well. And if someone can find like the right techs and stuff for it, because it is definitely something that requires some deck building. I don't think it's just a straight up, build it yourself type of thing where it's like, oh, here's 3 and 3 and 3 and 3 and 20 hand traps. I think there is some sort of innovation that can work with this. Like there was a Mimighoul list that topped this weekend. Actually, it was like Kashtira Mimighoul or something crazy like that.
Oh, was there?
Yeah. It was just a regional, but again, like I think if with Wave 1, if this deck is topping regionals, with these new support cards, 100%, this deck is absolutely capable of taking down regionals, and I think in the right hand, absolutely, you could see 1 or 2 spots from a YCS, 100%.
Okay, that is I would like for that to be true. Let's say it like that. I don't think it's impossible. I'm not 100% convinced. I guess this is a good time to mention Dominus Impulse. I'm sorry to be that guy.
Okay. So let's talk about this interaction. So Dominus Impulse is a new hand trap, essentially. It is a solemn warning, basically. So when a card or effect is activated that includes an effect that specials a monster, negate the effect.
Yep.
If you also have a trap in your grave, you can destroy it, but that's not the super important part. However, because you can activate it from your hand, it has this limitation. You cannot activate the effects of light, earth, and wind monsters. So if your opponent
for the rest of the game,
for
the rest of the game,
for the rest of the duel, yeah.
So
if your opponent is activates Impulse against you, they cannot activate Earth monsters. All your Mimighouls are Earths, so all the Mimighouls you give them don't trigger anymore. So Dominus Impulse locks you out of playing Mimighoul, essentially.
Yeah, because your opponent locks themselves out of Earth effects for the entire game. All the Mimighouls you give to them cannot activate when they're flipped.
I think that is a niche situation that won't come up anywhere near as much as people are thinking. And on top of that, you are locked out of lights, which means you're not playing against someone who's playing Fiendsmith. And I think if your opponent isn't playing Fiendsmith, I don't know, you might potentially be in a situation where Mimighoul is a contender versus that deck. Because you're clearly not playing Yubel or Snake Eye, right? So
I think what this means is that Mimighoul is simply something that is limited to certain formats where there is no deck that has that card in it, or not many.
If Impulse dominates the format, yeah, it's.
But here's another thing: if Mimighoul ever becomes popular, there's nothing stopping certain decks from just side decking that card against it, because it's literally the best card you can ever side against the deck. Even if your own deck is half Earth monsters, even if half of your deck works, you make your opponent's entire deck not function.
So, admittedly, if that happens, you can somewhat kind of play around it, right? Like you can just not use the effect of Throne, right? Because all of the Mimighouls, I believe, are built-in summons, right? Like there are some things you can do, right? You just play a more very reserved control version of the deck, and then
they all activate to summon from hand.
Oh, never mind. I thought they were built-in. Oh, Judge Rip, dude. Oh, the dream's dead.
So here's the thing. Here's the thing. I was just scrolling a tournament from the OCG just to see how many decks play the Dominus card. And at the moment, there is a bunch of decks that don't use it, I guess, is the good news. Like, and I think that's the thing. If that card is being played in a couple of meta decks, like let's say there's like 5 decks in the meta and 2 of them play that card, then you probably don't want to play the Mimighoul deck. But if it's a meta where at the moment none of the top decks really play the card, then it's probably just okay to play the deck. But yeah, it's like Tenpai Dragon is siding it right now, which is kind of weird. I feel like that'd be one of the best hand traps out there, but okay.
Yeah, I think it's because like Maxx C takes up like a huge number of slots, right?
Yeah, the Tenpai list I'm looking at is like 3 Fuwaross, 3 Purulia, 3 Maxx C, so like they don't have room for it apparently.
So, admittedly, if Impulse becomes super popular, like Mimighoul is like, I mean,
Yeah.
it kind of is just like a straight like win the game button against the deck.
It's just weird that it comes out in the same set, or the second wave comes out in the same set as like the best counter to a deck that you could even imagine. Because like I said, even if there's a deck that cannot, like, let's say you're playing a deck that has Fiendsmith cards in it, like, I would gladly be like, okay, I'm going to side out my Fiendsmith cards in order to put in Dominus Impulse. Because that card is not only a hand trap, but it also basically floodgates my opponent for the rest of the game. Like, it's the craziest kind of lingering floodgate. Like, that shit lingers until eternity. So, like, yeah.
It's weird because it's also like this trade-off. It's like, okay, so do you take the 33% chance to open Impulse? Or do you side out this entire Fiendsmith engine that you access every game, basically with any playable hand? That's like kind of a bit of a trade-off you have to think about. And it's like also like, you know, do you have to side for Mimighoul, right? Like if you're playing Yubel, like maybe
see, but that's the weird thing. Like what you're saying is like this deck can only ever exist as like a rogue deck, right? But in that category, it can be fine if no one's playing Dominus Impulse. Like, but it can never be like, it can never be tier 0 because that card exists.
Oh, I don't think anyone was expecting that, right?
No. I'm just saying, like, for future, like, if they get crazy support in the OCG or whatever, it always has this kind of thing looming over it where it came out at the same time as, like, the hard counter to it. But yeah, I guess yeah, you're right. The Mimighoul tier 0 dream was never really there. So, like, I think it can be a fine rogue deck in a format where that card is not super popular, basically.
Yeah, like this set has had me super hyped. I'm almost a little disappointed that YCS League is not going to be with Rhoda. It's really cool to think of some of the builds and stuff that can be played with Rota.
Yeah, you can add a Zamina card into Snake Eye to replace the 2 copies of Snake Eye Ash.
That is also a thing. Yeah, can't wait to see Fuwaross resolve multiple times in a Tenpai match. You know, because you walk around the YCS, you meet people, you talk to friends, and it's like the bad beat stories come out, and it's like, you know, previously I think people, when they give bad beat stories, it's like, okay, so I had this normal summon, he ashed me, so I was like, okay, cool, activate this, I extended, and then I like he had Nibiru, so I played around it by making this blah 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 blah, and then it's like with this shit, it's like the Mimighoul players are gonna be like, yeah, I got impulsed, or against Tenpai, yeah, I got Fuwarossed. So not much. Just the summary.
Also, Malcharmi Purulia is really good against Mimighoul because you have to summon them all from your hand to your opponent's side.
Yikes! I wonder how, like, I wonder if Perulia will still like see play after Fuwaross. Like, do you play like all 6 in your side? Like
In Tenpai for sure, but I can see it being a matter of people will main deck Fuwaross and side deck Perulia. I can see that happening.
Main Fuwaross in any deck, you think?
I mean, that's what people are doing in the OCG right now. But we'll see.
That's something. Okay. This has been pretty productive. Shout outs to the guy on the Patreon Discord, by the way, who was like, do you really think you can get a whole topic out of this? We yapped for almost 2 hours. There's a lot we can squeeze out of it.
Bro doubted. Incredible.
Do not doubt the power of content creators and streamers to stretch 10 minutes into 2 hours.
Yes.
Time dilation is very real. But yeah, thanks everyone for joining. I suppose unless there was any last final things you wanted to go over.
No, I think we covered everything I wanted to bring up. But overall, pretty nice day of reveals yesterday. Pretty good news all around. Good OCG list. Cool Mimighoul support. White people happy.
There was a bit of there was some like strange parts. I feel like to the stream with the quiz thing was very bizarre. But overall, it was super cool because having a set time and date for when a thing is going to happen.
Yeah.
Whether that be a ban list, whether that be like cards dropping, is really, really appreciated. And man, just waiting for the Mimighoul cards, it was like pretty hot. Like once that started getting revealed.
Yeah.
And Jerome as well was like giving you combos and stuff. Like that was really cool.
I already loved the first like iteration of that. They did a first thing in introducing all the Mimighoul cards for the last set, and I already thought that was a brilliant video.
Yeah, so more reveals like this, especially in advance and scheduled, is like super cool. It's a great event to as a content creator anyway, I suppose, as I'll say. Some bias there because you just get to watch it on stream with chat, but yeah. Okay. Patreon, $1 per month. Subscribe now. Thank you so much, guys, for tuning in. Next episode, we will probably do some sort of like format roundup or potentially like a Rage of the Abyss.
Yeah, we could do our Rage of the Abyss introduction kind of thing, maybe.
Because that is pretty soon. Like, let's see. So Rage of the Abyss is the 10th of October.
Yeah, it's like 2.5 weeks.
So the next weekend will be the 6th. Oh, I think it has to be Rota. Yeah, for sure. Okay, cool. That'll be the next episode. Rage of the Abyss deep dive.
No pun intended.
Read up on your sharks before then. All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.